Oh, I think we are live.
Yeah, it should be. It looks like it's going through this time. So just another like second or two. All right, it's done. All right, we're good. All right, so I'm just going to exit and then it's all yours. And it's just, yeah, hope it goes well. And I look forward to watching.
All right. Just getting a couple of little things situated really quick. Okay. Hello, 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 everybody. And welcome to this month's episode of Real Talk, Voicing the Margins, which is a program that's brought to you by Tri-City Collective and the Woody Guthrie Center. The Real Talk Voicing the Margins program aims to give often unheard voices of people of color, LGBTQ plus, economically, disadvantaged people. Just lost my train of thought. It aims to elevate, voices of marginalized people. Each discussion examines an issue impacting marginalized communities and features expert panels and who engage in some sort of a dialogue around a particular topic each month. This month, the Real Talk, Black Lives, Native Ties. Y'all see, I want to say Black Lives Matter. It's like second nature to me. Real Talk, Black Lives, Native Ties will engage in a dialogue about what it means to be a descendant of Black people who were held as slaves within the Native American nations. The first Black folks to Indian territory pre-statehood arrived as enslaved or human chattel, or recently freed people or AKA freedmen. Some were intermarried, some were mixed blood, but for the most part, they're all citizens of the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Seminole, and Chickasaw Nations. Our complex histories really helped to inform us by both like love and we oftentimes might sit in a bit of dissonance around our heritage. So that's what we aim to talk about today. Before I introduce you to our panelists, I just want to take a moment to go ahead and acknowledge where we are. I sit in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I think most of us are from Oklahoma. I don't know if I don't think we're all physically in Oklahoma right now, but I want to take a moment to just acknowledge that regardless of the fact that we are here to talk about a tie between Native American and African American people, we are definitely still on Native lands, and that is really important for us to acknowledge that and respect that. So jumping right in to our panelists, we have Kristi. I'm gonna need you to tell me how to pronounce your middle name in a moment, but last name Williams. I've never known how to say your middle name, but I need you to fix this for me in my life because I want to get it right every time. Kristi is an activist. I'm going to let her tell you a bit more about herself in a moment. We have, and I don't want to butcher anybody's names, by the way. So we also have Sache, and I feel like you told me Primeaux-Shaw? Oh yeah, I got it. And she directs action. Is a direct action distributed organizer for working families, for the Working Families Party. Sache also does quite a bit of activism work as well. I feel like that's how a lot of people probably know of you, and like the work that you do in politics. We also have Danyell Lanier, and please help correct me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly as well. But Danyell is a medical compliance trainer, but many of you probably know her as a recent congressional candidate. So I want to welcome these three ladies to the panel. Collectively, the four of us each have roots in tribes that held African slaves in some sort of way. In each of those tribes, it may have looked a little bit different, but the fact still stands that they all engaged in slaveholding practices. Some of us are descendants of people who were formerly held in bondage in one of these five tribes, AKA freedmen. Some of us are currently tribal citizens, some of us are not. And I just really hope that through this discussion that we help to elevate and bring some awareness to the diversity and complexities of what it means to have these intersecting Black and Indigenous identities. So I want to give the ladies an opportunity to introduce themselves. And when you introduce yourselves, can you do me a favor? Tell us a little bit about, what you do, but also let us know, how do you identify yourself and why? Let me start out with Sache.
Dang, I had to be on the spot first. Okay, thank you, Anissia. My name is Sache Primeaux-Shaw. I am a Ponca enrolled tribal member, Ponca tribe of Oklahoma, and I'm also of Seminole and Chickasaw Freedmen descent. So I'm a descendant as well as a by-blood member from a tribe that was totally removed from the tribes that we're talking about, because Ponca is a northern, originally from north central Nebraska and south central South Dakota. So those are their original homeland, well, our original homelands. But again, like I said, the Poncas were not slaveholding tribe, but it's just kind of interesting that like I'm of multiple tribes that are like on opposite ends of the country, and and it's just like, Poncas probably wouldn't even know what the five tribes did, or like what that was about, as a lot of Plains tribes would probably be the same. So yeah, those are my tribes. I'm intertribal. So but I'm also a native of Oklahoma City. My family's been in Oklahoma for about 7 generations now. And yeah, I mean, I've just, I guess, had this identity my entire life as a Black and Indigenous person, a Black Indian, if you will, like Indian, like Indian. And it's just something I live every day. When I was in undergrad, that's when I really started getting on Facebook and getting in different Black and Indian groups, or Black Indian like collectives, and I actually helped create one on Instagram with a couple friends of mine, called Blending Country. And then, but before then, I made a lot of connections with other Black and Indigenous folks. Shout out to Yanajaha Lone Wolf. She was actually one of the first that I met, and I consider her a mentor. Malachi McDonald, who was Mississippi Choctaw, and just several other people, Lorenzo Thompson, who's Nanacoke. So it's like I've been trying to engage others like me and trying to get the collective started as a whole for a while. Actually, most of my adult life. So as a result of my experiences growing up. So so yeah, that's a little bit about me. And like Anissia said, I do a lot in politics. So that's kind of like my in as well, as in trying to get like more not just Black and Indigenous folks involved, but also other marginalized communities involved in the political process, but especially Black and Indigenous folks, because we just need to take over everything, in my opinion, but in Oklahoma. But because it belongs to us. So I mean, this whole country does, but for the most part, Oklahoma for sure. So so yeah, that's my background. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for all that you do. Kristi, tell us a little bit about yourself, and include how you defined your identity, because I know we all, approach that from a different perspective. We have different words, different language, and different reasons behind that.
That's true. First, let me just say, Anissa, thank you for having me inviting me to this panel discussion. I am humbled and appreciated. My name is Kristi Williams, also known as Orisabiyi, as Anissia can't pronounce it, Orisabiyi. I'm the great-great-granddaughter of Creek Freedmen, 1874 Supreme Court Justice Jesse Franklin. And I'm also the great-granddaughter of Cherokee citizens Lily Vand and Abraham Mayberry, who are, again, my grandparents. So I have a unique makeup of African, Cherokee, and Creek Freedmen. And I introduce myself that way because I believe in bringing my ancestors in any space with me. I think that is crucial to the work that I do as an advocate, a community advocate. And I am also the campaign manager for our city councilor, District 1, Vanessa Hall Harper.
Thank you so much, Kristi Orisabiyi Williams.
Right.
I just needed to hear you say it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or I mess around and butcher it because that's rude. But thank you so much. I'm so glad to have you here. Next, Danyell.
Hello, everybody. I am Danyell Lanier, and as you can see, I am in transit. I am Cherokee descent. My mother was Lucy Ann Adair, and I am the granddaughter of a great granddaughter of Mariah Jones Adair, who actually walked the Trail of Tears. I was born in Tahlequah, and my mom, as you can obviously see, I have African descent. My mom was in an interracial relationship, and in 1975, her family wasn't going for that. So I was placed for an adoption, and I was adopted, and I actually grew up in a Black family, right in Hugo. But my family always made sure that I understood my heritage. They always made sure that I knew certain things about the Native American as best as they could. So when I did grow up, when I graduated from high school, I joined the military. I'm a Navy veteran. And when I served 5 years, I moved back home, but the opportunities weren't as great or as I would like for them to be. So I actually moved to Texas, and I have been in the healthcare field for the last 14 years. And thank you for that introduction, as well as a congressional candidate. I never thought that I would end up running for office, but my mother got sick, and I had to move back to Hugo to take care of her because my mom is stubborn and refused to move in with me. So I moved in with her. And with taking care of her, I saw the disparities amongst minorities, especially in the rural country. And when we're talking about rural healthcare, it doesn't matter what color you are. It matters whether your family can get you to the next state to get the care that you need to live. And that's exactly what I had to do. I had to take my mom to Dallas and to Texas so that she could recover from a stroke. That prompted me to start becoming a little bit more politically aware of what was happening in our district. And what really threw me into the race, and I tell this story all the time, is I was at the pharmacy picking up her medication, and I watched an elderly lady put her food back to pay for her medications. And I just was like, not on my watch. I can't stand by and not say something, not get involved. I've always been actively involved in the community. I've always been an advocate for veterans, especially for domestic violence survivors. I've always helped in just, ways that I've never really talked about. I figured it was just my duty to help somebody else. So when this happened, I really realized just how all of that, the sum of who I am is the sum of my work. And with running that race, that's what threw me into the congressional race. And the further that I got out on the campaign trail, the more people that I met, the more, support that I had, especially from women in Oklahoma that was just happy to see a woman running. And, a Native American woman, a Black woman running. I remember distinctively going to a church and speaking, and this elderly lady just broke down crying in front of me. And I was like, I'm just so happy to see you. Representation matters. Win or lose, draw, representation matters. So I'm still out here, even though I didn't win. This was not a good race for anybody in Oklahoma almost this year, but still, it's still a lot of work to do. I'm not going anywhere. We've made a lot of paveway, and I'm going to continue to stay around to make sure that we continue the work we've started. So that's me. And you did pronounce my last name right. It is Danyell Lanier. And thank you for having me.
Well, I'm so happy I said it right. And I'm also glad to have you. And thank you so much for telling us a bit about yourselves. I should probably tell you all a little bit about me. My name is Anissia West. I am, it's funny how I've defined my identity has evolved, and I think it's probably going to continue to evolve as I get older and change my perspective, and continue to learn and grow. Right now in this moment, I'm definitely someone who identifies as Black. Half time I don't even say African American anymore, although that too. I say that as well, but definitely Black, because no matter what country or continent I land on, I'm Black, right? But I also identify very much as Muskogee, just because that has always been not only a narrative, but also, elements of history and culture has always been something that I have been very keenly aware of in my life. I grew up with a pretty close relationship to my great-grandfather, Leroy Deloney. In fact, at one point he lived with us, and he was just a little baby when the Dawes Commission came through Indian Territory and started, doing their census and doing like the formal allotment process and enrollment process within the 5 tribes. So I am a descendant of Creek Freedmen. I think a lot of people don't know that about me. Even tribal citizens who are friends or who know, like, and love me might not even notice that I'm not a citizen of the Muskogee Nation. When I was a child, I definitely had a high level of shame around that. I don't anymore. I have grown. That is a part of the growth process that I wanted to just go ahead and share with you in case there's someone out there that's grappling with that today. But it is okay to hold both that sense of pride and what at the same time. Anywho, so I'm really excited to engage in this conversation about a topic that really just doesn't get discussed very often. So I'm wondering, because I know for me, when I first started realizing that, yes, I'm Black, but my heritage is a little bit different than other Black folks. And yes, I've been raised, knowing that we're a Creek, but my heritage as a Creek person is quite a bit different than other Creek folks. I'm wondering, what is your earliest memory of realizing your race and cultural identity? And what was that like for you? And I'll let anybody kind of jump in. I see Kristi already has her mic open. So, hint.
I have to learn to keep that on mute, don't I? Well, for me, my family always said, my mother's side of the family, I should say, I always knew that we had Native heritage. I knew that it was Creek, and I knew that it was Cherokee. Those stories were told. I told that my great-grandmother spoke Creek language. And then, growing up, how people would always tell you, I know y'all got some Indian in y'all family, look at your hair, and, and things like that. And my mother's side of the family, some of them were dark skinned, but a lot of them were red, as we say, red people. And And so just seeing that, I knew that there were some differences. But yeah, so that's kind of like how my introduction was into that. And then as I started learning a lot about the history of Greenwood, I learned, about the 5 civilized tribes. I learned that we were slaves of those tribes. And I remember hearing stories from my family where my Aunt Janie, my great Aunt Janie, had a white guardian over her land. And I never knew what that really meant until, I started reading the history of Greenwood. And then as I learned a lot through my friend and mentor and teacher, Eli Grayson, where I really got in depth with the knowledge and still learning a lot. And that's where I really found out a lot of the history that we are not taught and that we are not talked about as it relates to our Native ancestry, and and being slaves to the tribes. And so that was really surprising. And you learn that there's a whole nother part of advocacy that you have to do. I always tell people sometimes I'm pulled because I get, from Black people, are you talking about that Indian stuff? We need to be over here. We got our problems over here, but they don't realize that we have our own Black people in the tribes. We have issues. There are Black people in these tribes, right? And we are being discriminated against just as we are being discriminated against in this white supremacist system. So it's two sides. And so oftentimes I feel pulled in both of those directions. And sometimes you can't be spread thin enough to cover everything that you need to. So a lot of times I feel convicted about spending too much time in one or the other.
Yeah, I can see how it, well, not just can see, but I also know very well how hard it can be to navigate the duality there, especially when people are not that aware of even the existence of of that reality. I see Sache just popped a video on. It looks like she wants to go next.
I was just trying to get situated. Let's see. Okay, yeah. So I have a mouthful of when I first realized I was different. But I grew up in a predominantly Black community. And so I always participated in my culture, Ponca Seminole culture. I grew up going to Miccosukee Mission because my grandma was on the general council representing one of the Freedmen bands, our band, the Bruner Band. But I would say the first time I really knew that I had this dual identity and that I had, that I wasn't like everyone else in elementary school was when my grandparents came to visit me, my mom's parents, and their Ponca. And this kid was like, your grandparents are some Mexicans. And I was like, what? So and it wasn't the fact that he thought they were Mexican. It was the fact that what he said afterwards was what triggered me. And he was like, well, they're Mexicans, which means you're not Black. And I was like, what? I said, I am Black. I said, for the record, they're Native Americans. So I pushed him down in the sandbox. It's I was like, he said I wasn't Black, and it just really upset me because then after that, some kids started treating me differently, saying, things like, well, you're not really Black if one of your parents isn't Black. And I was just like, well, both my parents are mixed, but that doesn't mean anything. But kids were all like, well, you know how kids can be. And I didn't really understand what that meant until I got older and was in high school. And, people would make jokes about, oh, well, Sacha's half Puerto Rican, or she's this and that, and she's not really Black. And I was, just whatever, I let it roll off. But when I got in undergrad, that's when I started popping off at other people because, and I have to use that term because at this point it was natives coming at me saying that I wasn't Native enough. And it's on both ends, early on in life, it was on one end, And then, of course I had family members that treated me the same way, with not being Native enough. But it's like, I didn't really like pay that much attention to that until I got older. And that's when like I started developing a complex. So I would say last 2 years of undergrad was when I had like an awakening, I guess. And I was just like, you know what? Like, there's others out there like me. I'm gonna fight for the other Black natives, like, and so, yeah. But that was probably my earliest memory of knowing that I was different. And yeah, I mean, it was hard. It was like a hard, I would say, 10 years of my life, where I really like had that acknowledgement of that. But then, I started finding other people that I can have this type of dialogue like we are having right now with. And so, yeah, it got better after that. But yeah.
Thank you for that, Danyell.
Yeah, I can relate to what both of these sisters just said. For me, it was the same thing. It starts off, kids are mean, and it's even worse when you have an adult being mean to a kid. My first realization, I probably was about maybe 5 or 6, and it was the family. Like, oh, look at her pretty Indian hair, and then the kids at school, and I'm just gonna be very honest, they were like, "You're not Black." I'm like, "What do you mean? You don't have a booty?" I was like, "What? Not built like no Black girl." I'm like, "Well, gee, I'm like 8. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be built like." But, like Seisha said, it starts a complex in you where you're now start, questioning like, okay, well, where do I fit in? Which card am I going to use today? What am I supposed to, how am I supposed to identify? And, just with that, I would go back to my mom and I was like, the kids are teasing me and, why are they saying this to me? And she was like, well, and that's when she, came out and told me, or I would have family members that would say really mean things to me. Well, I was a mean kid myself, but that's a different story. So to get back at me, they would say things to me like, well, see, that's why your parents stole you from the reservation. You really not, Black. And they would make the Indian war cry and tease me and do things like that to me. And as a kid, you don't really have a voice to kind of roll with that. So what that did for me, it did cause me to start reading books because we didn't have the internet like we have now, but reading books to start identifying. And I did ask my mom. My parents, they had business relationships with Wilma Mankiller back then, so it would be her that would educate them to educate me. Does that make sense to everybody? So she would help them raise me and teach me what she knew from a distance without you know opening up this whole can of worms for me at that moment. So as I did get older, my parents did explain to me the story of how my adoption came to be, what my family was, and that was the truth as well. Like, in total honesty, my mother's parents didn't want her with a Black man, and she didn't want to have an abortion. She carried me to birth and she gave me up for an adoption. And for years, I used to feel like, maybe my life would have been different if I would have been raised in Tahlequah or raised in Stillwell. But I'm gonna be honest with y'all, it wasn't until I got in the congressional race and with all of this politics and everything happening that I truly realized that Lucy Ann Adair did me a favor, and that was she brought me to this world to be raised by people that would love me. Because I have family members on my Cherokee side, on my Adair side, that are racist, that had a problem with me, that was just, we were going at it on my Facebook page one day. Some days I forgot I was a candidate and I was just Danyell. And I had one cousin come out saying, you really should be glad that a white man freed you. Oh, really? That's what we're going to do? Okay, not a problem. I got you. So it would be things like that. And when they introduced my race on the Cherokee Phoenix, I had people, saying she's a freedman, she's this, she's that. There were like over 300 comments of this. And then my family got on there and felt like they needed to vindicate me. It was something, y'all. I had an event in Stillwell, and my family came out there like 30 strong to that, because they were like, we dare somebody to come out here and say something to you, you know? And I was like, I just never really realized that I had a war with my color to fight on all sides. Internally, I'm not Black enough because I don't have a booty, I guess. You know, externally to the world, I'm Black, I'm Native American. Is my hair long enough? Is it curly enough? It's just a constant, you know, peeling away at the layers of where exactly do you fit in? So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent, but I can relate to what everybody's saying about that.
No, you're good. I think one, sure, it may have been a little tangential, but it's also a very important story to tell. And it's also very relevant to the conversation. So no need to apologize. You know, like I said before, I hope that that we're able to be very, you know, natural in our conversation and just, you know, bring our full selves to the table. And that's exactly what you did. And I appreciate that. I also want to add that I really identify with everything that all of you all said. Of course, my story is a little different, but I definitely understand with just having to navigate sort of like racism on all fronts. It's like we're just like batting it left and right. I mean, my earliest memory of having like a fight in school and getting in trouble, like major trouble in school, it was behind someone expecting me to pick a side. You know, you need to define yourself as just Black, and a girl cut my hair. I was at Union 7th grade center back in the day, and a girl cut my hair, and I was literally at that school for one semester, and my mom pulled me out because it was just way too toxic. Because there were very few Black people there, and there were no natives to my knowledge. And you know how like Black people really want to hold on to something when it's not very many of us, right? And so if I did not say I was just that, I was now the problem. And now it's time to fight. The girl cut my hair, and I handled that on the bus on the way home and got suspended, but that's a whole nother. I'm not advocating violence, guys, but it does speak to this issue about developing a complex, because that happened, right? And then, you know, being in like, you know, ceremonial spaces, I remember, you know, people not necessarily knowing that I'm not a citizen, because phenotypically, maybe they say, okay, she looks like she's probably mixed. That's the assumption. And we can just talk about the Freedmen real badly in front of her because we assume that she's not one of them. And not realizing that I was. So I think my ambiguity has played, you know, like positively and negatively for me. Positively because I could weave in and out of certain spaces, but negatively because I have to hear things that I really just don't necessarily want to hear. And I say that just as like a bridge into our next kind of question about the whole idea of slavery and in our tribal nations. I feel like even if you're not a descendant of a tribally held, a person who was held in slavery, I don't want to call them slaves because I feel like that's problematic in itself, right? Like these are people who were held in bondage, but that doesn't necessarily define them and who they were, right? I think, y'all, I just had another lapse in where I was going. You know, I think oftentimes people don't know about them. And then, you know, like I personally as a child knew that I was Creek, but I didn't know about slavery. It wasn't until I was in like an Indian Ed program in middle school in 7th grade, and they told us about it. And I was hurt. I was deeply hurt. And And it took some years, many years, probably decades to really grapple with that emotionally and get to a place where it sat with me in a way. It was like, okay, this happened. You ain't got to cry about it. My question to you guys is, how did y'all find out about this issue, and how did it sit with you? How do you reconcile the feelings around that? Kristi, I see you came off mute. Go for it.
You know, well, as I said in my intro, I learned about the whole natives being slaves from Eli Grayson, and I knew about it just a little bit before Eli told me, but not in depth as what Eli taught me about, and it's devastating to hear that, and then to know that my great grandfather Jesse Franklin was the first and only African Creek to serve as a judge with the Supreme Court in the Creek Nation, and then to have all his rights stripped from him even in his passing. I mean, the Creek Nation kicked us out of the tribes, I believe, in 1979. But everything that he worked for, everything that he established, gone. There is no recognition of him. And when you think about what we lost, Creek freedmen were citizens of the Creek Nation. And when we became emancipated on June 14th, 1866, we all received 160 acres of land. And you wonder why we have so many Black towns throughout Oklahoma. The Creek Nation alone allotted over 1 million acres of land to Creek freedmen. And that's where the wealth came from. That's where the wealth, when we talk about, the wealth of Greenwood, and we talk about, Oklahoma being the promised land before it was even a state, when it was just Indian territory. Land was power, and the people who can own land here was Black people and Indians. So when I think about that, and I think about what we could have, not only, on one hand, as I say, we're fighting white supremacy, but on the other hand, we have to fight the Creek Nation. We have to fight these tribes who have not given their benefits and rights, the citizenship, back to their freedmen. And that's a lot that could be restored, and it is not. I mean, they literally fight to keep us from having that. So I'm devastated to know that my ancestors were slaves to the Creek Nation, and I'm more devastated that even today in 2020 they're still fighting to keep it that way.
Thank you for sharing. Danyell, I'm really curious to know what your experience and your thoughts are on this issue. I mean, I could be wrong, but if I'm remembering correctly, you're not necessarily a Freedman descendant, but which is a little different from the rest of us. But I'm so curious to know, as a Black woman, as a Native woman, how did you find out, and what was that experience like for you?
You're right. I'm not a Freedman, but I have Freedman family members through my adoptive family. For me, my mom, when I was like 15, 16, she took me to Tahlequah to go and get my roll card, if you will. And that, I guess, made me whole, if you want to look at it that way. It solidified my space in as a Cherokee citizen. We're talking about like 1992, 1993, during that time. So that gave me a sense of identity, partly, even though I couldn't identify my African American, family, because I never got a chance to meet my dad. But, it gave me balance as far as knowing this is who I am. It wasn't until years later that I did meet my family, that I was able to look at my aunts and my grandmother who did not speak English, and feel somewhat embraced during that time, as being the daughter of their sister and her daughter. So they did welcome me into their family. It gave me a sense of family, almost, if you will, because I could look at other people that looked like me for the first time in my life. So that meant something to me. But at the same time, I still, and even now, as 45 years old, I still feel displaced. I still don't feel like I'm fully rooted. It is difficult, just like we're saying, we're still fighting battles of our race. I'm still trying to have, everywhere I go, I have to identify if I'm a freedman or if I'm by blood, blood quantum. And it's almost like, what does that matter when you did have people in bondage? And when I say I have family members that are freedmen, we're talking about the Choctaws. And, the people that raised me that were trying to get their roll card, or, they later found out that with their family, they gave up all rights, stripped of all rights to have freedom. And it may seem like it was 100, 200 years ago, but not when those effects are still felt to this day. What do you do to this day when your family members were in bondage and you are not entitled to anything that they, lost blood, sweat, and tears behind? What do you do? What do you do with that? And even though I am, I do have, I'm not going to even call them entitlements, benefits, however you want to look at it, as being a Cherokee citizen, that means, it's wonderful. It's great that I can take advantage of it. I can pass that on to my children. Yeah, I can. And I have. But it also hurts my feelings that I have family members that cannot do the same. And so I continue to fight even for them, whatever I can do. I've attended a few meetings with the descendants of freedmen. So, we're not free. We're not all, we're all in it together. And that's how I look at that. And I'm still in the fight for whatever I can do for freedmen.
Thank you so much for that. And Sache, same question. But I mean, I know you are a descendant, so.
Yeah. Yeah, man, Kristi and Danyell have been on fire about this, and I appreciate it because, it kind of helps me segue into what, like, my experience in particular. I was a teenager when the Seminoles were expelled, back in the late 90s, early 2000s. That was back when John Veely, just graduated from OU Law. Like, I remember John Veely when he was like my age. So, and I'm gonna be 33 on Friday. So the thing is, like, that was, like Danielle said, that hurt. Like Kristi said, that hurts. Like, when people your ancestors have been with for generations, whether they're by blood, whether they're not, whether they're just, of African descent, our ancestors have been together for that long. Our ancestors were on that Trail of Tears. Some of my ancestors, freedmen and by blood, died on that Trail of Tears. My ancestor Abraham, who is my Seminole link, he married a Seminole woman, and that's where we get our blood from. However, all the kids were on the freedmen rolls, because they identified as freedmen. Abraham was with the Seminoles. He fought in the wars. Like, he, was an interpreter for the tribe. He came to Oklahoma, was forced here on the Trail of Tears, lived to be well into his 80s, but he participated too with the tribe, and he suffered with the tribe as well. So when my family was expelled, which that didn't include myself because I was on the Ponca roll at this point, but that was my father, that was my grandmother, that was my brother, sisters, my aunt and my uncle. Like, since they were kids, they've known nothing but Seminole Nation, Miccosukee Mission. And at that point, like, it's like these meetings that they were going to, and like those grounds that I played on all the time, it was a place where I'm like, well, are we even welcome here anymore? Like, and that's how I felt. I didn't want to go to any more meetings. I said, what's the point? Like, I mean, if they gonna kick us out. But my grandma, was with that group that like fought to get us back in the tribe, which they did. But to this day, the freedmen don't have full benefits within the Seminole Nation. just voting rights, really, you know. And so that's a whole nother ball of wax. But yeah, I first found out like about that legacy when that happened. My Chickasaw ancestry I found out about later on in life when I was doing my genealogy, when I got into genealogy back when I was about 21, 22 years old. But yeah, like it's mind blowing, because it's like, you know, yes, I do have ancestors who were white slave owning rapists, right? Because I mean, they were rapists. Like, that's how they're my ancestors. However, to know, like, even on my native side, this was going on too. Like, I mean, not Ponca obviously, but like the other two, it's just, it's hurtful, it's mind boggling, but also it's just a testament to the fact that white supremacy cuts deep, and it cuts deep into people of color, into some of the practices. Anti-blackness exists all over the world, and you know, we have to combat that in Indian country too. And you know, we have a lot of great allies, personally, that I know, who are you know, non-freedmen, non-black folks. Actually, I'm on a trip right now with my friend Jaisha Lyons Echo Hawk. She is an amazing ally to me as a black and indigenous person. She's just one of the few of the many, Ashley McCrae, like people like that, who, you know, if they hear any anti-blackness, they're like, whoa, like, you know, like, those are our relatives. My aunts, shout out to my aunts Christine and Gina and Dee Dee, like, they're all my Ponca aunties. They're my little moms. They stood up for me a lot, you know, when I was little. And now, you know, my aunt Christine, like, she'll come from White Eagle real quick to OKC to check somebody over her baby, because in their eyes, I'm Ponca, like the rest of their children. But, you know, again, like, if I was out with them, like, they just look at me differently, like, well, who's this kid? Even when I was a baby, but my primo side, like, you know, walking behind my grandpa in the grocery store, they're like, oh, there's a little lost black girl behind you. He's like, no, that's my grandbaby. You know, like, she's not lost. So, like, yeah, but yeah, that was my first experience. Really just, you know, my experience, I should say, with learning about the history of, you know, slavery within the 5 tribes. But yeah, I just think the more that folks are getting into genealogy, because there has been really a resurgence, and I won't just say with like the Black Panther movie, or, you know, Dr. What's his name? Henry Louis Gates's show. I just think people are wanting to be, they're wanting to return to their roots, right? And they're wanting to learn more about, you know, just their history in general, you know, as Black people. But then some are finding out, oh yeah, like, I found an ancestor on the rolls, and they find out it's Freedmen, and they're like, what does that mean? You know, and that's just been a lot of people's, you know, who haven't like known about it prior. There's been a lot of their reactions. And then they find out about slavery. And that's been like quite a few of folks that I've helped, you know, find family ancestry. And they're just like, well, I don't want to, you know, deal with any of this. And I was like, no, 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 no. Like, especially if they're Creek and Cherokee, because it's like Cherokee, you can like get enrolled if you choose to, and you can learn more about it. And it's really, I would say, the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw Nations, Seminoles to an extent, but those 4 tribes, like, you can like learn the language through different platforms. You can like learn all about your heritage. Like, I envy y'all for that, because Poncas, we got like what, cassette tapes that we got, and then there's like a website the Nebraska Poncas have, and it's, you know, like, I really don't I'm not really good at like teaching myself a language, like, without it being like, you know, easy, right? Instead of like trying to sound out words, and I'm like, what is that? Oh, okay, you know, and I'm just butchering it, and then like these elders are laughing at me, and I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna do this anymore. But yeah, so but yeah, that's just, you know, with people like trying to reconnect, reclaim their heritage, they'll run into that. And there has been some that have been apprehensive, as you know, Anissia, like, they're just like, I don't want to participate in that, but they need to, you know, like, they need to like
Yeah.
reclaim that. So
Yeah. Thank you for that. Okay, so as we've been talking, we've all kind of, brought up a bit about culture. We've also talked a bit about like politics and, legal battles that we have to face. And I think that there are probably some viewers and listeners out there who have no idea what we're talking about. And so I want to give us an opportunity to chat a bit about that at least a little bit before we close. I know we are, gosh, y'all, it's 2:54 and I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I think it's really important to get this part out before we close out. So, throughout this year, there's been lots and lots of like protests, a whole lot of Black Lives Matter related events, and everybody's been involved. It doesn't matter what racial background, what cultural background, everybody's been out there. Lots and lots of Native folks have been, out protesting with us. I know because I've been walking next to people, you know what I mean? I follow a lot of people who are talking about, Black and Native alliances and so on and so forth. So when we talk about Black Lives Matter, what's the Black Lives Matter issue of tribal nations? If police brutality and, killing Black men and women is the United States BLM issue, what is or are, so to speak, the Black Lives Matter or Black Native Lives Matter issues within our tribal communities? I'm gonna go ahead and let Kristi take that away. Kristi came off the mic first.
I know.
We'll go in order.
Well, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, and we've all been out there protesting and fighting for Black lives, especially as it relates to police brutality. But it's hard because you can't really be an advocate for Black Lives Matter and not also be an advocate for Black Lives Matter with these tribes. We have to fight for both of them because, and I keep speaking to the Creek Nation when I say this, we've been denied so much. Like, if Black lives really matter to the Creek Nation, then they would do right by the peace treaty. They would accept freedmen back into the tribe. They would give freedmen housing benefits. A lot of, they got a lot of CARES Act money based off the population, our numbers, but we're not getting any of that money, so it's so much to really expose and to tap into, and they're not being challenged the way that they should. Just as we're out here challenging police brutality, we have to challenge this too, and we'll never get up to reform. I don't believe that we're ever going to have police reform where it benefits Black people until we're able to compete economically. And the only way we can do that is also demanding reparations back from these tribes too. We have to do that. Black people have a unique history in Oklahoma. We talk about racism is everywhere, and that's true. But in Oklahoma, it's really unique, and as we celebrate Juneteenth here, but my people weren't emancipated until June 14th, 1866 from the peace treaty. But we don't talk about that. And a lot of people who are from Oklahoma, a lot of them are from these 5 civilized tribes if they trace their ancestry back. So even Juneteenth should be something different than what it is now, is what we're celebrating. But when it comes to Black Lives Matter, we have to push on all areas, because the Creek Nation, they sided with the Confederacy. So we have to hold them accountable as well, because Black lives does matter. Creek Freedmen, Black lives do matter.
Thanks, Kristi. Sache, jump in there.
Kristi took what I was going to say. that Black lives can't matter until the freedmen are reinstated. Just point blank, period. But also, I just find it funny. I'm gonna have to call them out because I don't care. I'm not enrolled in any of these tribes, However, I just think it's really hypocritical that some of these tribes, the ones that we're talking about right now, who currently do not have their freedmen reinstated, were having George Floyd rallies and marches. I just think that's extremely hypocritical. And the ones I'm referring to is the ones that happened in Seminole and the one that happened in Okmulgee. I'm just like, okay, what about these freedmen? I don't know how many in Creek Nation, that will be reinstated when that happens. I believe that. I'm speaking it into existence. But with the Seminoles, it's like, well, what about these? I think it's like in the thousands, but I can't remember the number right now. I know back in the day it was like 2,800 or something like that. But it's like, what about these some odd thousands of freedmen that are within your tribe, that are on your rolls? Like, they don't have full citizenship. So like, we can't be out here, saying Black Lives Matter and you support George Floyd, and you're like sponsoring this as a council member or, as the tribe, when you won't even do right by your own Black folks or by the folks of African descent that are in your tribe. So yeah, I'm just co-signing Kristi. It's ridiculous. Like I can't take them seriously like when that happens, because I'm just like, we have this whole elephant in the room. Yes. And no one is addressing it. And it's like, except us and except some of our allies who are, and who are citizens, or, non-freedmen, non-African descent. Like, there's some of them addressing it. But it's like, until we can get to that point where the freedmen are reinstated, where they do have full citizenship rights, like the Cherokees have done, then, and that even took a fight, several of them. Like, it's like, I just can't take them seriously, when they do things like that. I don't care if it is solidarity, but it's like, what about Kristi? What about you? What about my sisters who are not, or sisters and brothers and relatives who are not currently members of Muskogee Creek Nation, who are not currently members of the Chickasaws, Choctaws? Like, my family in the Seminole Nation, all they can do is vote. My brother can't even get a car tag. Like, it's,
Yes, it's sad. The five tribes, they receive more than $62 million annually in direct grants for housing and community development, and not one dime of that is going to any of our communities. And a lot of us, like, again, are freedmen descendants from that, but we're not able to benefit from any of that money. So just imagine $62 million annually for housing and community development, and we don't get one dime of that. And it is strict. It is intentional. It is intentional, and that is something, again, that we have to fight for. And I'll say it again: Creek Freedmen Black lives do matter, and Freedmen lives do matter to the other tribes as well. Cherokee, I can't say anything about because they gave their freedmen citizenship, but we have to challenge these other ones. It is beyond time.
Thank you, ladies. And just to interject, they didn't actually just give their freedmen descendants back their citizenship.
They had to
fought for a very long time. A very, very long time. Danyell, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I'll say this right here too. With Black Lives Matter, representation matters as well. When we're talking about the tribes that did recognize their freedmen, that do give full citizenship to Black citizens, when you start looking at the representation, you start looking at the government that doesn't look anything like us, right? Mm-hmm. So when we're saying that, I understand the effort, but it can't just be a gesture. It has to be in dollars. It has to be an investment. When we're talking about, if you're going to really get in a fight with Black Lives Matter, that means backing that up with money. That means backing that up to show that you really do stand with all citizens that you consider a part, that have that whole citizenship of enrollment. That means that you should see people that, I don't know, look like me. You know, I should be able to look at my council and see, because it's not just me that's out there. We should be able to see that. And until that starts happening, until we start demanding equality in all levels of government, until we start having a voice, a visual voice at that, we're still, again, we're still fighting a battle, even within our own state. Still, we're always at war, aren't we? Always.
Absolutely. Before we close out, I do have one question from one of our viewers. And anyone can, take this question. I'm going to read it. This is from, let's see who is from. It is from Colleen. And Colleen says, I am a Choctaw citizen and a descendant of slave-owning Choctaws. 9 of our slaves came on the Trail of Tears with my family. In addition to writing Chief Gary Batten, I think is how you say his name, and counselors advocating for full tribal citizens for freedmen, what can I and folks like myself do to advocate for inclusion? Yeah, that is a deep question. And the rest of the statement was the fact that that white folks can be Indian, but Black folks with a history of enslavement by our nations can be citizens is racist and discriminatory. And it's time for tribes to do the right thing. So, anybody has some advice for Colleen? What can she do politically?
I'll take a stab at that. Definitely like engaging the tribal council, that would be good. Like, but also finding other groups that are doing that work as well already. You had mentioned, Danyell, the 5 tribes, the Freedmen, the descendants of the, you know what I'm talking about.
Descendants of freedmen of the 5 civilized tribes.
Yeah, so the 5 civilized tribes. Always listen. It's a mouthful, but that's a group to get involved with. Marilyn Ban actually is heading that group, and then also the Creek Freedmen Descendants group with Rhonda Grayson. They're great. Sharon Lindsay, Jeff Kennedy. That's a great group to get involved with as well if you're a Creek Freedman descendant specifically. I know that there's a Chickasaw and Choctaw group that is in operation as well, and they have a Facebook group that you can get involved in. I'm involved in it, and they're a great group of people. I love them so much. We actually had like a Facebook like elders talk or whatever. I don't know why they named it that, but it was really fun. We did it on Facebook chat. But yeah, those are some ways to like get engaged with the issue directly and to like kind of help with some efforts that are already in place, because they've been doing a lot of work for a long time. So that's just my advice. And then also Eli would be a great person to talk to. He's a historian, genealogist, and then there's several people. Ron Graham is great. It's just, like I said, like if it's specific, then the Choctaw Chickasaw group, the Creek Freedmen group, but like as a whole, like the 5 tribes descendants group would be great as well.
And just to give you an idea, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Just to give folks
no, I was done.
The depth and breadth of the work that the Descendants of Freedmen of the 5 Civilized Tribes Association does. They do a lot of course, supporting genealogy work, but I think like some of the most powerful work that they do is around advocacy. Not only like locally going into, building into, tribal nations and working on building those relationships. They do a whole lot of educating the community, and then, gathering up the funds to support legal action. So if you get in connection with that organization, I think it can really be powerful. I'm sure they need more folks like yourself. Does anyone else want to take a stab at anything at that at all?
I'll just second what Sache said, to stay involved. For me, when I just started signing up for like Indian country, Native American voices, the tribe that she represents, go onto their webpage to stay involved, sign up for a newsletter. That way you're just kind of always in the know as to what's happening, what events are taking place, so that you can, stay abreast of what's going on.
I agree.
All right. Well, everybody, it was amazing to have an opportunity to have this discussion with you guys. I think a few of you probably mentioned that we don't get this opportunity to have these kind of conversations very often. I know for myself personally, typically if I'm talking about Freedmen issues, it's with somebody I'm, related to by blood ties. It's not like we have a look to ourselves or one specific culture that or some sort of trait that makes us stand out as, obviously different from other people. So, and because of that, it can be hard for us to find these opportunities to connect and talk about, things that matter to us most. But I hope that we continue to do this. And I really want to say thank you so much for sharing. I'm getting the feeling that we need to go deeper at some point, and maybe some points. And if so, I hope that you guys will be open to me reaching out to connect with you guys in the future. Okay.
Most definitely.
Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Sache, Danyell. I am going to, it's 3:10. We are only 10 minutes over time. So we did well. Thank you so much. And I look forward to reconnecting with you guys again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.